Well, Nikon did the thing. They put R3D Red RAW in one of their Nikon cameras. So this is going to be a first impression video of the Nikon ZR from a longtime Red user. If you don't know me, I'm Spencer Sakurai. I've been a DP for like 15 years now. I've shot commercials for Adidas, Google, ESPN. I've shot for Leon Bridges. I've even shot a couple of movies, and a good majority of that was shot on Red cameras. So I'm coming at this from the perspective of a longtime Red owner. I've got the Red Monstro and a Red Komodo, and today we're really going to be talking about this camera and if it will be able to replace the Komodo as a B camera in my workflow. This is going to be just the first impressions of the camera. In my next video, I will get a little bit more in depth. I'll probably compare it to the Red Monstro, but in this video, we're going to talk about this, what I think of it just kind of out of the box and playing with it for a couple days, and then really how it kind of compares to the Red Komodo overall, and if it's worth swapping these two out. Now, I'm sure you've already watched a lot of videos over this camera. It's been out for a couple of weeks now. I got mine in just a few days ago, so I'm not going to get too in depth about the camera. But here's what I'm going to say off the bat. If you want a camera that has professional I/O, SDI, proper time code, proper cinema menus, true 24 frames per second. Well, that's not the Nikon ZR. That would be closer to the Red Komodo, which is a proper cinema camera. Really what the Nikon ZR feels like is like a vlog camera that Nikon made, and then once they bought Red, they were like, let's use this as a testing ground to throw in R3D and see how it performs. Now, I do have to say right off the bat, I was surprised by this. I was surprised at how good the Red RAW actually looks in this. Now they say it's a 12-bit and not a 16-bit Red RAW, and I think there's even some rumors, honestly, that the Komodo has a 14-bit sensor. Maybe that's just the Komodo X. This may not even be true 16-bit either. It might just be in a 16-bit wrapper. I don't know that for sure, but what I can say is these images look very close to each other, and we'll talk about that in a second. There is a little bit less saturation coming out of this right out of the gate, which means it does probably have lower bit depth. That's a perceived thing. That's something I've noticed through testing a lot of cameras over the years. If it has a lower bit rate, you're going to have less punch off the bat. But what I can say is this does look like R3D footage, as in it does give you the detail that R3D gives you versus other mirrorless cameras that have 10-bit codecs. I can for sure see the difference. I shot a quick test with ProRes right next to the Red RAW, and of course those are different color profiles because you're using N-Log versus Log 3G10, but the sharpness is there, the detail is there, and that's why I've always shot on Red. The price to quality ratio is why I've kind of always chosen Red. Fairly inexpensive cameras these days. If you get a used one like my used Monstro, I got that for a very reasonable deal based on what it cost when it came out, and you're getting that R3D workflow. That's why I always shot with the Komodo. I actually shot an entire movie on the Red Komodo, and it's a great little camera. It has plenty of its own quirks, and it was never designed to be an A camera, but I've used it as an A camera for many years, and it works really well. And really, I would say that when the Komodo came out, if this came out, I would have been elated. I would have been crazy about this camera. But this is a hybrid. Do not forget this is a hybrid camera. If it says cinema on the body, don't buy into the marketing. This is a hybrid camera. Do have to say though, the benefit of the hybrid is this 4-inch screen on the back. I love this 4-inch screen. This 4-inch screen makes me want to just be able to pick up this camera and shoot with it. And I don't want to rig it out. I really don't want to rig this camera out. People are going to do that. They're going to make cinebacks for it. They're going to put monitors on it. They're going to try to use it like I use the Red Komodo. That's not at all what my intention is for this camera. My intention is to mount this to things. Put it on a C-stand, boom it up over something, strap it to a car. I have no intention of using this as an A camera. You could use it as an A camera, but you're just going to be a lot of quirks, and you're not probably going to love this camera as an A camera. The bit rates are about double what the Komodo 6K is in medium quality. I've never shoot in high quality on the Komodo anyways. I don't even think it's worth testing. So this has a 512 card in it, and it gets about 45 minutes. That's also because it shoots proxies automatically. I'm sure there's a way of turning that off. I just haven't looked into that yet. It just shoot an MP4 alongside the R3Ds when you shoot. It's going to fill up a card really fast. 45 minutes isn't terrible. The Komodo gets around the same amount on like a 256. It really is double the file size. Micro HDMI. That's terrible. No one wants that. One screw hole on the bottom. The door is where your cards go. I haven't had this be a problem yet. I can imagine if you rig this up and you put any plates on the bottom of this, that could start to become an issue, or depending on how big your tripod is, that could become an issue. The way I've been using it, just as like on its own, has not been an issue. Actually, a benefit of it is that on most cameras, when you open up the battery door, the camera turns off. This one does not have that problem. If you open the battery door, actually you can eject the card and the camera will stay on. Does it really matter? I don't know. Not really, because this camera turns on in less than a second, which if you've seen my Instagram lately, I did a little test. This one takes roughly 26 to 28 seconds or something like that. People were saying mine took even longer. I don't know if that's true. It doesn't make any sense to me. This turns on in almost not even a second. So if you want to shoot red raw and you want to be able to just turn on a camera and shoot, maybe if you're out in the field somewhere and you just need to get a quick shot, this one will do it quickly. That is a benefit. 32-bit flow audio recording, that's very interesting. I plan to use this as my YouTube camera / B camera. So for me, 32-bit float, autofocus, and the ability to use R3D is very intriguing. This is full frame versus the Komodo, which is Super 35. And this will do red raw 60 in 6K, which the Komodo cannot do. It can only do 40 frames per second on the full sensor, and it's still Super 35. Now, if you want to match Super 35, you can go into the 4K mode on this, and you can shoot Super 35 and still get red raw and crop in. That's really nice as well. But the fact that that's 60 already kind of makes it beat the Komodo in a lot of ways, especially for B-roll territory. Now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna switch over to a little A/B setup here while I finish talking about this camera, and we're gonna see the image quality. How does it compare to the Komodo? Very quick test, not scientific. I do have to say, in my testing so far, the dynamic range, like everyone's been saying on the internet, is not as good as the Komodo. Dynamic range doesn't have to be a big deal. Now, I want as much dynamic range as I can get because it makes my life easier on set. Now, if it's your B camera, does it need to have the same dynamic range as your A camera? No, it does not, depending on your situation. I pretty much light everything I shoot, so dynamic range becomes less of an issue when you're lighting everything. That being said, if you want to use this as a crash cam like I would use the Komodo, as a B cam like I would use the Komodo, you're going to be probably mounting this to a car outside in the daylight or something to that effect, or putting it in tight spots. When you're actually in those scenarios, you might not have the ability to light your subject. So the fact that this barely has just over 10 stops of dynamic range, based on the tests that people have done, that is kind of an issue. So it kind of makes you wonder, like, would you rather have an FX3 as your B camera or keep the Komodo as a B camera? Because of just the dynamic range issue. It really excels in so many other ways, but the dynamic range is a fault. That is something that kind of sucks about this. And I'd be really curious to see what the next iteration of these cameras would be. What other Nikon camera has been in development for years that they're going to slap R3D into? Because I don't know if people know that it takes a long time to make a camera, 2 to 3 years. So this camera was designed a long time ago, a long time before they bought Red. They just threw that stuff in here. Good testing ground, I do have to say. This camera only costs $2,200. It's extremely inexpensive. So most of the caveats that I'm talking about today don't really matter because it's so inexpensive. You just buy the camera anyways because it just doesn't cost that much money, and it has some downfalls, but maybe that doesn't matter to you. Okay, let's talk a little bit more in a second. What we're going to do is do a little A/B setup here, like kind of almost like an interview setup with the Komodo and the Nikon ZR. There'll be different lenses. I'm going to just throw autofocus on both of them just so we can do this quickly, but I think you'll get the idea. Okay, so there's a couple things I want to talk about before we jump into the next test. First off, I recently shot a short film. I'm really proud of it. I released a video about that last week. You should go check that out now if you haven't seen that. So if you're interested in narrative filmmaking, you can just click the link in my description below to sign up for my email list, and you can watch that film now. It's not fully live on YouTube. I'm using this kind of link system just in case it goes to festivals and whatnot, and so I don't get in trouble for already having it premiere online. Additionally, I would like to talk about the sponsor of this video, which is Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform to present your work online. Start a completely personalized website with Design Intelligence from Squarespace. Design Intelligence empowers anyone to build a beautiful, bespoke digital identity to use across your entire online presence. Maybe you want to start an online store to sell your photography or other products. Squarespace has the built-in functionality to get one of those up and running quickly. I've actually been using Squarespace to run my online stores for almost a decade now. And of course, if you're like me, you're probably looking to build a portfolio, which Squarespace has tons of features for that very thing. You can even create private galleries for client work using these tools. As you acquire work through your website, you can now collect payments using branded invoices, manage client info, feedback, and payment activity all in one place. So if you're looking for a home for your work, you can do that with Squarespace. Click the link in the description to get 10% off, and I want to thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Okay, both cameras are 800 ISO, 5600 Kelvin. Maybe I'll put the Nikon at f4. Just get that exposure a little bit more dialed here. You can see the autofocus works great on the Nikon. Definitely no issues for this sort of thing. No false color on the Nikon. Micro HDMI, so if you're going to run into a monitor that has false color, you can do that, but it's not going to be as secure as SDI. Of course, the Komodo has the SDI protocol, and you can blow up the SDI on the Komodo. I've never had that issue. I've had the camera for like 4 years, never had any SDI issues with it. So other than it just being a little finicky here and there. So a couple benefits for the Nikon ZR versus the Komodo. Of course, its price. Komodo's used now you can get for the same price. You could probably get a full kit for just over $3,000, maybe $3,500. It's a little bit more money, but you are getting a more full service, we'll call it, cinema camera versus the Nikon, which is a hybrid. The full frame is a benefit. When using it alongside my Monstro, I'll be able to use my Thighpoc lenses. I'll be able to see the full image circle of the Thighpocs, which we'll definitely talk about in the next video. I'll be doing a side-by-side with the Thighpocs on it and get some test footage with the Monstro and the ZR. We're not going to get into that in this video. One of the main benefits I see using these Nikon as my B camera versus the Komodo would actually be the battery situation. If you want to put a battery on the Komodo, you're going to have to use a V-mount, or you can use a little BP batteries, but either way, you have to have a battery attached to the back. And the Komodo's already a little bit bigger than the Nikon ZR. Put a battery on it, you put a gold mount on it, you put a V-mount on it, whatever. It's going to bulk up the camera quite a bit. And a battery like that will last, I don't know, 2.5 hours or something like that. Well, the Nikon battery, little baby mirrorless battery, runs around 2 hours on the Nikon already as well. And you don't have to add an additional battery. It's already inside this little compact camera. So I think that's a pretty big benefit coming in the terms of using it as a B camera. Using it for an A camera, that's pretty neat too, because you could hot swap batteries if you were to rig it out and put a V mount on it. You could leave that battery in there all the time, which is nice as well. And something else I noticed was definitely the white balance. I've always kind of not been happy with the white balance on the Komodo. It leans a little warm. If you're shooting at 5600 Kelvin, it leans more towards like, it looks like it's more at 6000 Kelvin. It has this little shift to it. Whereas the Nikon seems to have more proper blues in the highlights when shooting in daylight. So I like that. That more closely matches my Monstro. So that's nice. The Nikon's not going to come close in dynamic range to the Monstro, and we'll find that out when we do our Monstro test in the next video. But that will be an issue, I suppose. In a really controlled lighting environment, it's not going to be an issue, but if it's a run and gun situation, some dynamic range would be nice from the Nikon. Seems like they updated the autofocus tracking on the Komodo. There's a new situation on the app, which, by the way, the Nikon, I don't think has a decent viewing app. So that's kind of a downside if you're trying to compare it to any other mirrorless camera for video, especially if you wanted to film yourself or something like that. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but when I downloaded the app that was recommended, it doesn't really be able to control, like live preview a video doesn't seem to be happening, which is something that I would use a lot if I were to use this as also my YouTube camera filming myself, or if I want to use it as a B camera and I want to like mount it to a car and quickly jump in the car and just look at an image, I can't, which means I'll have to run it into a wireless transmitter. And that's already a cumbersome thing with the Komodo, is running wireless off of it and trying to keep it small. I was hoping to not have to do that with the Nikon. So if you want to throw a follow focus on it, you're going to have to still figure out some sort of wireless transmission for it. You could get a smaller wireless transmission just for the Nikon, which is something I might consider doing, like a DJI SDR or something like that. And then run, of course, the micro HDMI. Probably putting a half cage on the Nikon seems like the right thing to do. And then definitely getting a micro HDMI dongle with a lock on it. That way you don't ruin the HDMI port on this camera. Right now I'm recording the 32-bit float into the Nikon using this little Rode Go. Multiple gain outputs, but I bet the 32-bit float sounds really nice. So I'm gonna do a really quick side-by-side here. Maybe we'll do some more extensive ones after this, but I want you to look at the noise pattern when I just slightly underexpose the Nikon versus the Komodo. And I wouldn't even say the Komodo is a super clean sensor. Relatively speaking, it definitely has more noise than the Monstro. Let's see what the Nikon can pull off. I'm pretty sure the Nikon is a little bit noisier. Okay, so the autofocus was messing up, and I think that we should do a more proper exposure to show off the noise. I did show it here on my shirt, and it was already pretty bad at the f4 versus the f2.8. So here's another quick test just to kind of show the dynamic range. You're going to just really see quickly that the Nikon ZR does not have as much dynamic range as the Komodo, and it's just really noisy. Something that really disappoints me, to be honest. Both cameras are at 800 ISO at f2.8. They both seem to be clipping the highlights just for the sake of an exposure. Okay, we're going to stop down the lens back there. So here's both cameras at 5.6. I don't know. Those tests seem kind of inconclusive. Most of my testing would show that the Nikon definitely has noise and it's easy to underexpose. But when I shot them at the same aperture, that wasn't the case. Things to seem to be pretty even. The highlights may be clipped a little earlier on the Nikon if you look at those wide shots there. But I'll do some more conclusive testing in my next video when we compare it to the Monstro and after I get a few more days playing with the camera.